This is the Amp Hour Podcast, recorded September 22nd, 2015. Episode 268. An interview with Luke of yCombinator. Welcome to the Amp Hour. I'm Chris Gamble of Contextual Electronics.
And I'm Luke Iseman from yCombinator.
Welcome, Luke. Coming to us from across the pond in late night hostel of of somewhere in England. Is that right?
Yeah, in London. Sorry if you hear any drunk rugby players celebrating in the background.
We wouldn't have it any other way. That's great. I love it.
Keep it interesting.
Yeah. So that's great, though. I mean, so yCombinator, obviously we hear a lot about that these days. We hear about, obviously, the increasing interest in hardware, and that's what we're going to talk to you about. But before we get to that, why don't we hear a little bit about you? What's your background? Where do you come from?
So I applied to everywhere except for where I got into college for electrical engineering, and then I happened to get into Wharton at UPenn for business, literally the one place that I hadn't applied for EE. And I've kind of deferred my parents' advice, took that opportunity, and I've kind of been trying to catch up via my own projects ever since. So I ran a club during college. We set up computer labs in developing countries using donated equipment largely, as well as in inner cities in Philadelphia, New York, DC. So that was like not circuit board level hacking, but kind of got me introduced to the concept that maybe we could reconfigure all this hardware around us to have at least a little more useful life, and got me addicted to traveling and really the opportunities to really just hack on physical things all around us.
That's great.
From there, I graduated before I was in the entrepreneurship program at Wharton, like 2 years before entrepreneurship became cool. So everybody was kind of like, what are you going to do after school now? And I was like, that's a very good question. One of the only startups I found interested in hiring a business guy was down in Austin, Texas. So I worked for that for a little bit, worked for a software thing down there eventually, and then kind of got tired of sitting in a cubicle I was doing business integration. So like biz dev, but integrating our software with partners. And it was a whole lot of time just sitting at a desk. So I kind of quit without a plan, traveled till I more or less ran out of money, and then on a lark tried driving a bike taxi, one of the pedicabs in downtown Austin.
Oh, nice. I used to take those when I was, what's the nice way of saying that? Drinking heavily.
Yeah, that happens in Austin sometimes.
Yeah, it does, right, yeah.
So at that time I didn't know how to weld or anything. I'd just figured I'd try driving one that was for rent. And then...
Oh, because those guys usually make their own? Is that the idea?
Some of them do. There's like 2 or 3 companies that mainly sell them. So long story short, I hacked one together, had a big argument with the city about getting it legalized, and ended up over the next couple of years building a fleet of 20 of them of my own design. It was kind of like the ultimate lifestyle business. I was making about as much as I did like in my corporate job, but had,
nice.
I rode around the bike as my job and had 20 other bikes that my friends could do the same with. So that was fun for a while, but it wasn't like really it was a good lifestyle business. Like it was fun, but it wasn't technically challenging day to day, just kind of physically challenging. So from there, I started taking more time to work on my own projects. Kind of in the same time frame, I built a shield to do gardening via an Arduino. I called it Garduino, and wrote about it for Make. Yep. Sold it as a kit, just like didn't promote it or anything. Super simple, like not sophisticated at all. Kind of iterated on that slowly over time. Worked on some other software stuff, and eventually Garduino grew into GrowerBot, which was like a small Kickstarter I did several years ago. Just like a more sophisticated, Wi-Fi connected, two Omron relays to control AC outlets hooked up to a pump or a light or whatever else you want in response to readings for temperature, humidity, light intensity, and soil conductivity as like a proxy for moisture.
Okay.
So again, that was just like a small kit, kind of a fun thing to do. And then that interspersed with some other projects grew over time. And had a co-founder for something we called it initially Soil IQ. And it was basically, we got Yves Bahar to do the industrial design on it and some other really strong partners, and did kind of a soccer out of the box, just works, solar powered, looks really good. And that was the company with which I got into yCombinator. So I worked on that for a while, it was a lot of fun. And then I left that to kind of work on other things about a year and a half ago, and did a big interactive art project for Burning Man, traveled a bit more, built a shipping container house in West Oakland to deal with the crazy real estate stuff going on in the Bay Area. And yeah, just kind of from there started helping out with some projects involved with yCombinator. Essentially, Sam, who runs the program, was asking some interesting questions about like what he could do to better support hardware companies. And having largely bootstrapped my own stuff, had a very cash conservative plan for what we might do to have a lot of impact without spending a ton of money, because I'm used to starting my businesses. So buying $100 versus 10,000 of equipment is, a big deal when it's out of your own pocket.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting trend. We've talked about that on the show before as well, just kind of talking about, I don't know if it's just a trend I've seen or if it's actually a thing, but like, it feels like hardware people in general are kind of cheapskates. Do you see that?
Yeah, I kind of like wrestle with it too, because, I'm not retiring anytime soon, but like I have a little more money than I spend now. So I have to like force myself. I should not be using worn out drill bits like when I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely a cheapskate. I think it comes because like hardware, I don't buy this whole hardware is hard thing. I think hardware is easier every year. But you
hear that, folks?
Right? our monkey brains, I think, have to catch up with that a little bit.
Are you listening and troubleshooting right now? You're not doing it well enough.
Right?
Solder better, soldier.
It's different than software, but like especially at the prototyping stage, I'm hard pressed to think of anything when you're building like unit one of something. And if you're ignoring your cost for one unit, which you should pretty much always be doing on a high growth hardware startup, it's a little slower. It's a little more complicated in some ways than software. But this whole hardware is so hard. I don't know. I mean, like we have a lot of cool advantages too. Like people expect to pay for hardware, unlike software, for example.
Right. Yep.
Really helps as a thing to build a business around when people expect to pay you for it.
Right. Well, when I hear the hardware is hard thing, I think of two things. One is, there's no like built-in distribution network, right? So there's nothing like click a button and now you're in the App Store and now you have access to 10 million users or however many users are on there, right? Or however many downloads you might get by making it, free or, at cost, that kind of thing. You don't have the distribution network that software can have in theory. And then the other piece would be just no one expects manufacturing. I mean, it feels like every time you're like, oh yeah, no, this is really, you really gotta, there's no, it's a recompiling thing, right? There is no recompiling hardware. It's like you have to be perfect when you go to production.
Right. And a lot of that's about like people setting expectations correctly. No one that I've ever talked to has told me that once you do DFM on and make 100 of them for your tests, that it takes more than 18 months to make very large quantity, like to fulfill Kickstarter gone crazy. The problem is when people set backers' expectations to be like, oh yeah, it'll be here next month, and then they get
3 months,
50,000 orders. Right. That's not hard. That's impossible. Right. Like that just doesn't work.
Right.
But if you go in with the
distribution thing again, right? I mean, like that's like someone's like, well, I backed an indie video game and I clicked the button and everybody downloaded it, right?
Yeah.
That's the difference.
It's definitely easier in some ways to get software out there, but I don't know, net, like I think software is boring is more true than hardware is hard. Like you don't have barriers to people copying you like you do with, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Is a coupling of them, right? Like there's very few products that are just purely one or the other anymore.
That's true. Yeah. Well, and personally, so from my experience, I've been moving over to the software side. I work in web stuff now, not as the developer, but as just like the product guy, and seeing that stuff, even like I didn't even realize all the things that there were, and like getting people to actually use stuff. I guess that's kind of the big difference too, is that like you mentioned, people pay for your stuff, right? And that actually has a different feeling for me, is that when something's free, like obviously Dave's not here, but his stuff's all of his videos are free online, and because of that, people have all these expectations like, oh, you should do everything I wanted to. I didn't pay for this, but it's that weird transition when someone pays for something. They're always nicer. I don't know why, but like it feels like just like on the whole, maybe it's just a more limited audience, but in terms of like customer interfacing, it's always nicer and less expectations for some reason.
Huh, interesting. I never thought about it like that. But yeah, I mean, like the other thing is, I mean, with my GrowerBot Kickstarter, it was super small, like 70 units or something. And I was freaking out that I was like a month or two late. I think the average backer, like 99% of backers, it feels like expect projects to be a couple months late. I don't think they get nearly as worked up as creators of projects do. Like I think people are a lot more forgiving, especially if it's like a niche thing where they're just excited that this new thing's going to exist. I think we're probably harder on ourselves. Most project creators are harder on ourselves than most backers.
What was the retail cost on the GrowerBot? Like what were people paying?
I don't even remember. It was like 3 or 4 years ago. I think like there were different points. Like all of my personal projects I'm behind on documentation on a lot of them, but like the container house and everything, it's all open source. Like, and I try to sell kit versions. So, free open source plans as well as kit versions and then finished product. So there was a kit like with Garduino, the cheapest kit was like $19 or something. I wanted it to be, more important to me than like, I don't think we make really good customers, hobbyists. So for me, it's more about like building a community of people who will engage with the thing that you're doing, even if I have to like, if I had to work other jobs to support that, I think it results in like, I don't know, it's really tough to see any open source hardware projects that have gotten like giant without really compromising the integrity of the project in a lot of ways, right? Like,
I have no idea who you're talking about.
Nobody.
Person that works for in the VC world and a company that might have gone VC, but not with yCombinator.
Yeah, I mean, and that sucks to see because I mean, I think there are some people who you shouldn't work with who can give you money, but like, really, I can't speak as well. I don't know anybody as well as yCombinator, but for us, it's a bunch of hackers who want to see other cool stuff being built, and they want to only help stuff that they think can be really big. Like, if you just use that as a filter for what projects you admit, turns out like interesting things that you think will be really big with competent founders is a pretty good filter for things that are likely to make a lot of money as well. Like a lot of them will fail, right? That's the whole model. But it results in a really interesting network of really smart alumni, some of whose companies succeed, some of whose fail, but it's also it's a good filter for finding interesting people to work with as well.
Yeah, definitely. Going back to the expectations thing real quick on the Kickstarter stuff, I feel like anything that's less than $100 is like just throwaway, right? I mean that's like almost consumer level. Not saying that they throw away the product, but just in terms of the actual expectations on delivery and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's a lot. I think that pricing matters a lot. An interesting company from our last batch called Nebbia is a $300 to $400 shower head. And if you had asked me buy a shower head that costs more than $20, I would have laughed at you. I took a shower in Nebbia's shower, and is that it's way more sustainable. So it uses like 30% as much water as a normal shower. The reason people are buying it at a $300 to $400 price point, which is like way more than you need to pay for just the cheapest shower, is because it's beautiful. So I thought that $100 barrier and other prices like that, I still think it does, but I think you can make exceptions to it. Like, I think most people don't care whether their shower head costs, most people don't even know whether it costs $100. And if you make really beautiful, more sustainable things that people use every day, like Nebbia's done, people are more than willing to pay a couple extra $100 for it, which is fascinating. Like, I didn't think we'd see that happen.
Yeah, no. I agree with that, but what I'm saying is that like, did Nebbia do a Kickstarter?
They did, yeah.
Okay, so did they deliver on time?
They just did their Kickstarter during the last batch. So I think their Kickstarter, they started their Kickstarter during the batch, and then it ended after demo day. which was really cool to see because their position then compared to like a lot of companies with hardware historically are like, yeah, we're going to try to build this thing someday, and they don't have anything working. To see our companies rapidly versions that they show to users rather than get and iterate based on what people actually tell them, and then in the case of Nebby and others, like programmers shortly after get to a big crowdfunding campaign. That's really cool to see. Like that for future investors. Then it's not just like, I think of it as like until you have something to physically show people, you're just another smart person with an ambitious plan, right? Like, and anybody you meet with is going to think of you that way. When you have actual hardware to show someone, and then two, when you have people actually paying money for it, then it becomes really easy to convince someone who maybe doesn't understand every detail of your business why it's an interesting thing, right? Like people are proactively giving you money to ship this thing, and here's a working copy of it right now. That's a much better discussion for an entrepreneur to have as opposed to the norm of I'm a guy with a plan who's going to someday build something.
Yeah. Right. Well, no, yeah. And what my point was though, is that just that, like that threshold kind of thing is that's where people start to actually care, right? So I agree with your points about having a piece of hardware that actually is working. That's going to help you sell the higher margin type stuff there, especially like, shower heads type thing. But just the expectations are different, depending where you are, right? Less than $100, the expectations are whatever, but up in the $300, $400 level, people are really buying into that kind of thing too. So that's why I'm sure that they're going to have, the people that are actually in there are going to be a strong community. So.
Yeah, I think you're right. One of the cool things that I hope to see companies do is, your marginal cost goes down substantially with later iterations as you learn more about manufacturing and as you produce more of something. So I'm excited to see people do like initial 1,000 to 10,000 at a higher price point, and then over time reduce the cost and have it be like this normal thing. It's less exclusive and it's cheaper. And it's cheaper to make and cheaper to sell. So I think that could be, especially with things like Nebbia, where it's got a aspect to it. I think that could be a really cool way for companies to grow over time. But yeah, less than $100. I totally agree with you. You're well in territory where you can kind of just get, if you provide some interesting updates. I feel like, I'm thinking of the Kickstarters, a bit of a Kickstarter problem, an Indiegogo problem. Back like over 100 of them. A lot of them are like stupid small things or cool small things like comic books or whatever. But yeah, if it's below $100, I'm not checking in on the campaigns as much.
Right. Exactly. Yep. So could you give us a feel for, so people are coming into Y Combinator, you said that they might have an idea, or they might, obviously if they have a prototype, they're in much better shape. But like, how far do you expect them to get by the time? If people don't know as well, could you explain demo day as well? Like, so start to finish, what do you expect people to see as a hardware company coming into a program like that? So,
quick overview of how it works. Two times a year, we have a class or batch, we call them, winter and summer. Applications are open now. Anyone listening should apply.
Okay. Yep.
And how it works is you apply online. Should take you a couple hours maybe to fill out the application. What's really cool is, and what I remember most from when we filled out ours, is it's really questions you should be asking yourself anyways. So even if you don't get in, or even if you don't submit it for that matter, these are like questions you should be thinking about, like how will you make money? What is the equity division? What understanding about this market that your competitors don't? So really basic questions that it's easy to sometimes forget to regularly check yourself on as a startup. So people apply online, and then small proportion of them get invited to interviews. For interviews, we fly everyone here, in-person interviews with several partners in the room. And then that evening, very little ambiguity, offered a spot or not. If you're offered a spot, it's essentially $20,000 for what boils down to basically 7% of your company. And your team, founders are expected to be here for the 3-month batch. During that batch, basically you're getting as much or as little help as you want. So some startups, you can basically do YC still and not get a lot out of it, but the best startups will be doing their own thing like 80 hours of the week, as in talking to customers and iterating on their product. And then they'll kind of, basically on Tuesday nights, we have a dinner and some time for office hours. They'll kind of come to those, get good general advice. And then also, as issues come up, just ask us honestly, like whether it's disputes between founders or questions about how to scale into retail, whatever comes up, they'll just basically ask us and ask our alumni, very targeted ones that get the most out of it. And then in terms of what we expect companies to do over the course of the batch, every company is different and they all have their own challenges. Every company is after the same thing, which is
becoming $1 billion company, right?
Right, exactly. So we don't break out hardware differently. Same, they're all different. We don't break out hardware differently. It's in totally mixed with software. We have biotech as well. And that struck me as really strange, to be honest, like when I was applying and when I was going through with my company. But the more I think about it, the more sense it makes. There should be few to no excuses for why a hardware startup at the very earliest stages, like ignoring manufacturing everything, because that often comes later. The very early stages on like ignoring your incremental cost per unit, there's very few things that a startup doing hardware cannot do nearly as quickly as a startup doing software. Like it should never take you more than an extra week, whether it's getting populated PCBs or a 3D printed enclosure or whatever. It shouldn't take you more than a week longer to do any aspect of your project at the earliest stages.
Okay, I'm going to challenge you on this because I'm sure that you've met this challenge already in the past. I mean, doesn't that depend? I mean, maybe this is more indicative of the companies that are there, but like, doesn't that depend on complexity? Like, I imagine a sensor attached to a Bluetooth device, yes, you can get that going. But if you have like multiple PCBs and interconnects and everything else, like, what is the level of complexity that you're seeing for products that are hardware products coming through?
That's all over the place. And, a caveat to this, like I'm leaving out largely because I don't understand it well enough yet. I'm leaving out a lot of the biotech, although that's looking a lot like when you start to look at the wet lab stuff, like renting benches and the biotech hacker spaces that are popping up, starting to look a whole lot like hardware did 10 to 20 years ago.
Yeah, there's one in Oakland. There's a workspace in Oakland, isn't there?
There is Counterculture, and then I was just at Gen Space in New York, which is doing really cool stuff, and then there's BioCurious in the South Bay. Even the locations where they're popping up, it kind of echoes like what happened with initial U.S. hacker spaces, right? So leaving out the details on that, and then leaving out like giant stuff. Like we've funded a couple companies working on nuclear energy. I'm not smart enough to come up with a low cost iteration style for them.
Well, we had time to activate the material, but containment, we didn't have time for the containment.
That's in version 2.
We're going to be glowing at demo day. Yeah.
Oh boy. But yeah, I mean, like on the more complex stuff, it can take a little longer. But if you really empower yourself to not, and this is hard because we are, like you said earlier, we're all kind of cheapskates in some unreasonable ways. Like ignoring whether your PCB or your assembly on it is going to cost, $10 or $12 per square inch, empowers you to get a lot of stuff done. And then because our companies are building on the body of knowledge of like 900 plus other companies that have gone through before, and we're starting to, I think we're nearing triple digit of those that have been hardware. You're not just finding a PCBA on your own. Part of my job is to make sure that I have like 3 answers for where you should get any of this done that have been recommended by previous YC startups. And the cool thing is we're starting to see forward-thinking vendors who are doing what AWS and other software guys do with incubators, where they basically give, and even broader, they just basically give away hosting to early stage startups because they know some small proportion will grow into big customers. I have a PCBA, a couple of them now that are giving discounts, some of which are now switching to actual straight up credits on assembly, some even covering components for the first like several, it's not a huge amount of money, but like first several $1,000s for my startups. What's cool is that gets you to pull the trigger, right? Like you'll send a board earlier than you would when you have that credit. It's totally irrational.
Right. It's not my money, right? I mean, that makes sense. I would do that too. It's like, well, I can burn one, like if I have to, bodge it later, or if I have to pay for the next one my own, at least I've gotten the easy mistakes out of the system.
And then when you think about that over the course of a product being developed, when you come at it from a software like perspective like that, where from day one we're basically asking you, why aren't you shipping yet? That really changes the pace overall. Like, there's no one giant thing we do. It's just that overall attitude, and that applied to every little thing in hardware that results in our companies moving really quickly and delivering some amazing products.
So how much would it be? So like I also think about some of this stuff I think about the software side and the stuff I've learned about software and things like that, minimum viable. Obviously, we've had Eric Reese on the show before, and he's talked about minimum viable product for software and hardware and stuff like that as well. And I wonder, is it like, are some of the YC companies doing like cardboard prototypes almost, where it's like, well, imagine this now lights up and has a screen kind of thing, or is it actually to the point where, or is it more like, well, we have a Raspberry Pi with a off the shelf TFT board from Adafruit or something like that, and then we'll get the cost down later by spinning a custom?
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be both. I think it should first be literally, I mean, before you even build anything, like, what, because there's such weird stuff that happens with economies of scale. Like, you now have what is by all accounts a pretty decent tablet from Amazon for $50, right? And that's, yeah, their new Fire 7-inch tablet is very similar in spec to what the Nexus 7, which I hadn't loved, was. And I'm sure it's like locked down a bunch of stupid ways that people will fix quickly. But that's in the US prices. When I was in Shenzhen like a year and a half ago, I bought a tablet for like $18 that had 2 SIM cards, a micro SD, a TV tuner, and for under $20. So like, you should fundamentally step back, I think, and before you build any like connected consumer device, ask yourself, like, are you sure this isn't an app, or couldn't be an app? And before you build like custom screen and all this other stuff that's going to cost you so much more to do in small to medium quantities, you should ask yourself, like, are you sure this isn't just a sensor connecting over Bluetooth or Wi-Fi to utilize like a cell phone or a tablet that everyone who's likely to buy your product has to do most of the lifting, right? So like, stepping, even before you start building anything, talking to people and figuring out, like, is this something that anyone actually wants?
Right.
My favorite example is with some of my work on the gardening sensors. I spent a lot of time trying to optimize for this little 0.5 watt solar panel that I was using. I wanted that to cover all of my Wi-Fi. Like, I wanted it to basically run forever with like a couple hours of questionable quality sunlight, and started looking at battery chemistry because I wanted something.
Plants can do it.
Exactly.
Come on.
I should have been able to. And I decided I needed it. I just assumed I needed it to send readings every minute. And then as I talked to more users, turns out like nobody cares. If you send readings 4 times a day, people are thrilled. And that, obviously the power load for that is drastically less, like it's like 1,000th as much as the power that I was trying to optimize for. So it becomes like talking to users a little bit more, a couple more hours, actually asking people what they want would have saved me literally hundreds of hours of of development work over optimizing for something that it turns out nobody cares about.
Well, that is a lesson that could be, I think, that could be extended to every single industry in the world. Like that is the role of like interfacing with customers, marketing with customers, that kind of thing, like product facing marketing. My goodness, like that is, I think about the other companies I've been at before too, where you're like, why are we doing this? And then you go talk to a marketing person or salesperson. They're like, well, this one really important customer wants it. And you're like, do they really, really want? Are they going to pay for this? And this is kind of what Eric was talking about when he was on the show too. Are they really going to pay for this? Will they pay for it right now? And if the answer is no, then why the hell are we doing this? Like that.
And it's a lot of it's stuff like that is blindingly simple when you actually hear it, and a lot of it is just like saying the really simple stuff like that after you hear it, you're like, yeah, of course we shouldn't build this feature that nobody cares about and nobody's gonna pay for.
Right. Well, and I don't even think about it as like a feature that no one's going to use. I think it's a feature. Well, there is definitely that, but like I think about the one where it's like the one where someone's definitely going to use it, but the fact is it's going to take 6 months to make it, to include that kind of thing, right? So coming from the test industry world, there's always like some crazy ass feature or measurement that someone needs that no one else does, and it's not like an add-on or anything like that. It's just in everything, and it's like, yeah, that took 6 extra months, and so who are you pissing off by shipping later because of that?
Right, exactly. And then the really interesting thing is like finding. I think the best entrepreneurs do this crazy balancing act where they're insanely committed to making their thing happen, but then on the like they have their vision and they're uncompromising on that, but then on the details they apply straight up Eric Ries style optimization, right? Like they're going to make this company happen in this category. They have this broad vision, but then the details of how they get there and what feature set exactly that has, those are all open to optimization based on users. So it's a weird balance because you want like the bold vision, like this person's going to move the world, but also the willingness to do so in a way that people actually want.
So the thing that I always balked at was like thinking, like when I think about it, obviously I come from a technical background, and what I think about is like, well, the best products are going to be the most complex ones, right? To have a really successful company, you need to have a really standout technology, and it just doesn't seem like that's the case so much as having good timing, having good attention to customers, and having a good team that can execute all that stuff. I mean, does that resonate with you, or is that wrong?
No, I agree. And like, I think timing is part of it. It depends on how far out you're looking at it, right?
Well, my friend was talking to me today about Webvan, which I don't know if everybody knows about. It was like a delivery service in the late 90s for like food service delivery, and he keeps bringing it up to me because I was raving about being able to get food at 10 at night that was like custom made last time I was in San Francisco, and that's like just a thing now. It's like everybody does that, whereas in the 90s it was like, no, it doesn't happen yet. No one pays with their phone. No one orders food from strangers like that. I mean, there's delivery services, but you're calling a restaurant kind of thing.
Yeah, that one, like, at least you can make a kind of rational argument for text advanced, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Frankly, podcasts are one of the weirder ones for me. I don't know why everyone is all, right? Like, podcasts were around in, late 90s? They were fully technically...
Well,
early 2000s at the latest.
I think 04 was the first ones that really were called podcasts. Yeah, the late 90s was more like... was like posting what was that called? Oh God, real audio format stuff to like a file. You know, they were streaming.
Oh yeah,
stuff.
I remember that. I used to listen to 2600 like that.
yeah, that was a good example. Yeah.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, like in the last year or so, it's become this mainstream thing. That one, to me, there's like with Webvan and stuff like that, you could argue that there's some sense, blah blah blah, but with there's some unpredictability. Like no matter what you do, I think you have to keep in mind that stuff can go wrong with any one idea, with any one startup. Mm-hmm. And I think the best entrepreneurs just like maintain some perspective around it, right? Like this is a good problem to have. The privilege of being able to try and fail at starting a business. It's not the end of the world, right? Like you're not going to starve to death. We're all going to be okay. Like you can find other cool stuff to build.
You're going to eat oranges and hot dogs like Elon Musk did. Did you ever read that story?
Yeah, that's amazing. And like, you know, the best part is that he's saying that I think partially to brag, but partially because he looks back on it with nostalgia. Like when I maxed out my credit card starting the bike taxi thing, I mean, every entrepreneur who's gone through that, I feel like misses times like that. It was hard, but you look back, it's like a good hard. Like it's a stress. The term I think in psychology is eustress, like healthy stress, where it's not stress like, oh my God, what am I going to do? It's stress like you're pushing yourself to near your limits. And yeah, it sucks at the time, but in retrospect, you're like, that was so cool that I was able to do that.
Right. It's like the dad in Calvin and Hobbes. He's like, it builds character, right? That's the thing he always says there.
There you go.
Right. Shoveling snow builds character, yeah.
Right?
No, the thing with Elon Musk, so if people don't know, like he did this thing where he was just proving to himself he would never really starve because he lived on $30 a month or something like that, and he ate oranges and hot dogs. And the only thing I came away from that story was not that like, oh well, obviously he could survive. It's who the hell would eat oranges and hot dogs? Like, why is that the food that you would choose? There are so many other options.
That's a pretty weird one. I mean,
like ramen,
I would do pasta, like pizza and beer. Find cheap pizza. Sure. Yeah. And I mean, that's pretty much what I do anyways.
Right. So you mentioned podcasts. We should also mention. So one of the podcasts I've come to love is Startup, and in the second season, they go to yCombinator. right?
Yeah, I think the Dating Ring. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
they're still called that. I listened to 1 or 2 episodes of it. I'm not up to date on it, but yeah,
Yeah.
Dating Ring was a portfolio company, or still is. Um, that whole thing that's a tough one. That's just so meta, right? Like I mean, I like it and I need to catch up on it, but that's like there's another one, KQED's doing a podcast. It's a public radio station in the Bay Area, interviewing people who make podcasts. I'm like,
oh yeah, that's a little meta for me too.
I'm sure it's going to be great. I just need to suspend like the what is it, like navel gazing? Is that the term?
Yeah, exactly right. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that's a little much. Or like when people write poems about poetry and songs about singing, and comedians talk about being comedians on the road. It's like, I don't relate to this. I'm sorry. So,
right.
Yeah. Yeah, that, and so what about that though? I mean, because obviously you've come in, you started with an action, building a company, that kind of thing, and you've come into that. So, and then you've been part of the program, and now you're helping run the program. There is a lot of crap around this now. You know what I mean? Like I see all these television companies are putting out calls for doing reality shows around this crap, and and when I say crap, I mean like just startup culture. And it seems like it is that kind of meta navel gazy kind of stuff. So what's the deal with that? I mean, is that gonna fall off, or do you not even pay attention to that, or what's the deal?
I mean, it's like I joked earlier about like when I went through school, entrepreneurship not being cool yet, and I'd prefer that like to this. I don't want to have to filter out, because there's a lot of really smart people with really prestigious degrees, and we could, if we put out a call for ex-Googlers starting companies, we'd probably get 1,000 applicants.
Right. Yep.
And the fact that startups are kind of now seen as like this career step for people, it sucks, because it makes it harder to filter out who's actually crazy enough to do like founding a startup is not the way to maximize your wealth. It's the way to be a crazy person who would rather like accept likelihood of running out of money for chance of changing the world. Yeah. Right? Like you want to maximize your wealth, be like employee number 10.
Yeah.
Right after companies are founded.
At something that is going to do well, right?
Exactly. I think like the best way to do that, if you're just can do kind of earlier stage stuff, but I always want a paycheck, and I don't want to be a founder. I'm scared of it for whatever, or it doesn't fit my risk profile. Like stay to right over your vesting cliff at a series of startups that aren't in exactly the same industry, so it's not totally correlated risk, but go around and do that in a decade, have like 2 years of vesting at 5 of them. And then you're still getting paid. You're not bearing the primary risk, but you're also not like the guy. I mean, that's important. We need more people doing that.
Then you just wait it out.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, it's a portfolio.
Yeah.
It is tough to filter when like so many brilliant people are starting startups. You got to like maintain some craziness to it, right? Like you need people who are going to stick around and, come downturn or come any of the many inevitable startup setbacks that they'll face. Like you need people crazy enough to irrationally stick around, because otherwise it's just boring and they're not going to succeed.
Yeah, that makes sense. I kind of think about it like I always kind of laugh when I look. So I have some friends that were like in music programs in college and stuff like that, and some of them were doing classical stuff, and that's fine. But like 1 or 2 of them were doing like jazz. And like the institutionalization of jazz, like this music that was just like completely figured out as it went along and all that other stuff. And now there's like structure around it, and there's like a path through it. Now you can get like a master's or PhD in jazz. It just doesn't really register for me. You know what I mean? Like Louis Armstrong did not have a PhD. He just figured shit out. You know what I mean? Like that's what I think about.
Right. Like that's a good change in perspective as well. Like if you think about, should I be an artist playing on, like, should I play or start a startup as my way of, moving the world and pursuing something that makes me happy, then you arrive at a very different conversation and perspective than when you think about it as, should I stay as employee number 5,000 at a giant company or start a startup, right? Like you should be doing it because it's what you're passionate about. From like the perspective of an artist or someone else who makes significant sacrifice in what their average income is going to be to change
Yeah.
the world. Because like otherwise, it's literally not worth doing.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Which is, and I think that's like at the best, that's what we. At the
Cool.
worst, it becomes just like this thing where everybody during upturns was start up to put on their resume, and during downturns, everybody runs away. So yeah, I mean, it's. I would rather it was a little less cool.
Damn it, it's cool. We've talked about. I mean, we've talked about that on the show too.
Right?
Just like the fact, and Dave and I have talked about that. Like, just wait it out. Hardware it's hot right now. And that kind of gets some fervor around it for sure. But if you've enjoyed doing this stuff, just keep doing it, right? I mean, because it is gonna go away at some point, and then it'll come back again and go away again, and yada yada yada, back and forth cycles, right? So, and that's fine. I think a lot of our listening audience is into it for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be strong demand for smart people willing to work hard on technically innovative things, right? Like all of the listeners they're gonna be okay. There's gonna be more work for them than they can possibly do.
So, getting back to the hardware stuff. So you guys are in the South Bay, which I don't know why, but that always surprised me. So you guys are like the Sand Hill Road, like Silicon Valley, just straight up Silicon Valley stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think technically like 10 miles, 10 miles away from actual Sand Hill Road.
Okay. Yep.
It's basically like people kind of, and I think we'll see this increasingly, different regulations and different demand in different places for things like biotech. But we're seeing a lot of companies that are very location linked. Like we just had a company called Chaldal that is like Webvan, Amazon Fresh style stuff combined with like warehousing in Bangladesh. And the way that Bangladeshi population density works is like integral to their business. They've taken advantage of the lack of fresh, local, etc. there. So it's very specific to theirs. They come for 3 months for us to coach them and to grow their business. And they still have increasingly companies go back and forth and maybe have some employees there. With drones, we've started to see that as well. Like Flirty is a drone delivery company in our latest batch. And
Wow.
permissions are way different in New Zealand. They have like actual trials with customers who will pay them money to deliver things in New Zealand, which you can't do yet here. So they were back and forth a lot.
Interesting. Yeah.
Basically, like counterintuitively, one would think that, oh, it's all remote and it's all software, blah, blah, blah. But having people here in person is, it's really important. It's key to the program, I think.
Yeah. I'm always surprised too that there's, not necessarily with YC or with other startups, but just how much infrastructure is still in the area. Because I always think about, there was so much coming up 50s, 60s, 70s as the Silicon Valley, as there was still tons and tons of the actual silicon being made there. I can imagine that there's tons of support stuff around there, machinists and equipment makers and all that other kind of stuff to support the fabs and all the labs that were there. But then that stuff started to move away. But what I was surprised at is just the amount of board houses that are still there, the machinists that are still there. I mean, those are still shrinking, but I was surprised there were still so many given the relatively high cost of location.
Yeah, I think a lot of them for medical and for aerospace, there's still a meaningful amount of aerospace
Things
stuff,
that have margin,
especially
basically.
Right, exactly. Like
Yeah.
super high margin. And it's funny seeing them like try to engage with startups. It's like, no, this is not a 3-year project, and there are like twice as many zeros on the end of that price as there possibly
Right.
should be.
Right. Have you heard of Shenzhen? And we're
Right.
in. Yeah. No, that happened to me actually. We got some. We put out for bids for tooling for some plastics that I was working on at one of my past companies, and like factor of 5, factor of 10 difference in terms of tooling costs. Like, you just can't. There's no salesmanship there. There's no buddy system. It's like, dude, you can't come close. You go back to the. I mean, they have to make their way on the. It might be because their costs are actually like that, but they have to make their way on those higher margin businesses. So it's kind of tough to get that cross pollination they hope for.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, like, I don't know if you know Nixton, Plethora Labs, their stuff.
I do. Yeah.
That things like that, like adding some automation in, I think will help reduce. Like, it's unclear to me exactly how much of that, Nick would probably know offhand, but how much of the cost of getting a part, like let's say an aluminum mold for injection molding, how much of getting that made is the human labor compared to like the actual machine time? I mean, material cost is next to nothing, especially with like aluminum or steel.
Right, yeah, because you're gonna. I mean, if you're buying that in bulk, anyways, you're gonna get pretty much the same costs. I think it might be a little different with the electronic side of things. Yeah, and to explain Plethora as well, Plethora is like a CAD and CAM solution where you basically you put the stock, you pick a stock material out of the actual material they have on hand, and you put that into your CAD program. Then it does the CAM around it, and then the robot loads it into a machine. It cuts it, so there's very minimal human interaction. So that's Jeremy and Nick do that at Plethora. But I think that's a little bit less so for the component stuff, because as you know, and as a lot of our listeners know, so much of the supply chain stuff happens in the Shenzhen area. I mean, some of it's like if you're buying from TI, you're probably buying from TI and you're going to get the same pricing here or there if you're at the right volumes and they like you the same. But, you know, if you need to get those jelly bean parts, you're probably going to be able to get the jelly bean parts a little bit lower cost. And just the, you know, like the stuff that kind of adds up over time. When you're in Shenzhen, it feels like you're going to get a little bit more of those savings, maybe with a reduction in quality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like people over drama, like there's so much drama around like, oh, where am I going to make this with some entrepreneurs? It's like, who cares? Like make it effectively somewhere that can do it at a reasonable cost. Our best startups, like I don't care whether Nebbia's showerhead costs them $40 or $50 to make, and neither should they. What they should be worried about is making it awesome and building this brand that people continue to be willing to pay like drastically more than the commoditized versions of things for their branded better things.
Right.
And I mean, it's a lot easier to say than to pull off, but when startups can do that, that's like, okay, cool. So most of these things that people will tell you are so difficult, like a lot of it comes down to squeezing bomb. A lot of it comes down to overpromising and under delivering. And when you have startups that are selling at like, 90, like their bomb is 5% of what they're selling for, then
you get a lot of wiggle, right?
Yeah, totally. And then when you look at stuff with some software and some services built in, then it starts to be like, oh, okay. So like most of these things that are hard to do really well, you can pay extra for, and it doesn't make the problem go away. It's not suddenly a non-issue to manufacture, but it becomes a lot easier when you can be like, okay, squeezing my bomb is not making or breaking my business. Because most of those companies, like, I mean, I'm hard pressed to think of an exception to this. Like, what giant billion-dollar world-changing company worked because they were able to squeeze their bomb a little tighter, right? Like, I can't think of any. Can you?
Especially at the beginning. I mean, that's the thing that optimizes over time for sure. But I think the other thing too is that I think that also comes down to market as well. Like, if you're in a marketplace where you have to compete on price, or if you're already starting out competing on price, you're not gonna do well regardless, right? I mean, because
totally.
The bigger guys just gonna be like, oh well, I've got rock bottom costs, right? We're both selling this thing for $100, and you're starting to be that fly that I'm swatting away. Okay, my product's $80 now. What you gonna do about that? You can't afford to drop your retail price $20,
right?
Because that means that you have to take 40% off your bomb or something.
Totally agreed. And Amazon is widely rumored to be selling the $50 tablet I mentioned. They're selling it supposedly at cost because it's subsidized. Like they make so much. They could cut that they could give, I mean, how many tens of thousands of those away before it would even like be something that investors cared to note and maybe react to with their stock price would probably go up if they gave away 100,000 of those, frankly. Like,
regarding the Amazon stock price, I have no idea what the logic is behind that. They're like, hey, we haven't had any profit for the entire existence of our company, but yeah, that price just keeps going up on our stock. So I don't understand it. So I agree. If they're like, we're losing more money, yay! We're making more money, yay!
Right. And like if you or I had just kickstarted a $90 tablet, we'd be like, okay, so now we're bankrupt. Right? Like
exactly. Right, because I laid out the costs for tooling and I made a mistake and now I have to redo that and yep, it's all over.
Or, but what gets really interesting is if like you made a beautiful tablet that had like some crazy custom enclosure that people are thinking about it as like an object of desire, somewhere weird between fashion and technology and brand, where they're like,
Yeah.
this is the cool thing to have. I paid $100 my Nikes and I'll pay $300 for this $50 tablet that looks beautiful, has like,
Yep.
know what I mean? That's what's really hard to think about, like having startups navigate, but there's so much opportunity there, right? Like to divorce.
I guarantee some of our listeners right now are like screaming. If you're screaming at your radio or your podcast player right now, we hear you, because like honestly, with the Luke and I are both we're hardware people, right? We don't. I think feeling that at first is really frustrating, right? Because we do what we can to optimize those BOM costs. That's what we're around for. That's what I think about myself as I'm there to make something low cost, and not low cost, but that is a big differential between what we're cost and what we're selling it for, and all the other stuff. Raising that what we're selling it for feels fluffy, but honestly, that's where you get the most bang for your buck, right? Because there's only so low you can go. You can't get any closer to zero. That zero is as low as you can go.
And it's like us learning a bit more about how these crazy things like branding and actually selling to users work makes us able to do so much more damage, right? Like really entrepreneur. Whereas, getting a little better at antenna design, I can't get can't get too excited about that. I mean, it's important, like people need to optimize that, but it doesn't, it's not something that at the early stages is going to make or break your startup. And to me, there are just so many opportunities for us to do extremely early stage things, like thousands of company long laundry list of just not crazy advanced. Like we're not talking about fresh out of the lab, like new categories of sensors, just commoditized hardware, things that to me don't exist, should, and could be like extremely large, like $100 million plus markets, especially when you start looking at B2B. Like T-Bot is this company one of my favorite companies in our most recent batch. And they're a little kiosk that some engineers in Canada put up near their school in a mall. And it's like 10 or 60 in like 10% interval proportions to the exact degree water temperature that you want. You can do custom blends, like no person there. You can make custom high-end tea blends yourself. It dispenses them. And they're growing quickly, not because they like engineered something crazy, but because hardware to deliver this thing that turns out people really care about having high quality tea. They're willing to pay tea costs next to nothing, even for good tea.
Right. Even the best stuff.
Right. So they're selling like maybe 20, 30 cents worth of ingredients for $3 or so. And then as they started like getting more trial customers, turns out this is like one of the most profitable things. People who own little cafes or just have spare space in their restaurants or retail areas, it's one of the most profitable things per square foot that they can do. So it's like,
oh wow,
there's so many things like that. And it's execution is not like, it's a non-trivial challenge to execute stuff like that, obviously. But there's so many things like that where like, there's cool optimization stuff they'll do to get their BOM lower to make their every aspect of it work better. But just like execution to make a business out of that with largely commodity stuff, there's so many opportunities like that.
I feel like it's kind of the difference too. Like, I think this is a big differentiation too. Is like when I think about some of the things that our listeners have talked about or are interested in. A lot of it is projects and learning about new technology, stuff like that. But like I kind of differentiate the product side of things because, like you're saying, a lot of it is this commodity level stuff where the interesting thing might be the supply chain or it might be the software side, that other stuff. I mean that's kind of just in my head as the differentiation is product versus project. And it almost kind of parallels the if you really enjoy doing something for the technology, you might want to keep that as a hobby because it's going to get bastardized if you try to take it to the marketplace because there's going to be realities to it. That's just kind of how I see that kind of stuff of if you want to do all of the fun stuff, don't try to necessarily make it a product, but if you want to make an interesting thing that can, like you said, can actually affect affect the marketplace and the environment, that kind of thing, then yeah, then go figure out what works and make that.
Yeah, like if you want to do like a BLE project, instead of doing another BLE dev kit, because there are, in my opinion, very strong ones, and unless you have like some hocus pocus that I'm not thinking of that everybody's going to want, instead of like doing another BLE dev kit as a maker to sell to other makers, think about like the damage you could do by doing a beautiful BLE connected device that you just do even one of. Like, don't even sell it, and then just put it out there, document it well, and have that be a portfolio piece for you, where like when 20 startups in my next batch need on very quick turnaround to do some BLE stuff, you are like the first person they find because your beautiful portfolio. Know what I mean? Like, that seems like a better way to keep your project how you want it, rather than having to compromise it to try to sell to the crappy customer that me and every other maker would be for you.
Right,
I think that's something that like some people doing their jobs at, and that can also be like, I think, quite lucrative. Plenty of companies want early stage hardware stuff done, and there's not hundreds and hundreds of people willing to do it.
Right. Yeah, I've gone to a couple of the hardware startup events in San Francisco now too, and talking to people there, I'm like looking around, I'm talking to people, and they're like really excited about hardware. I'm like, this is great. And then I'm like, so what do you do? And they're all like, oh, well, I do software, and I'm looking for people that can help me with hardware. And I'm like, no one here makes hardware. What the hell, man? Like, but like you said, it's opportunity, right? That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that they see something they want in the world. And for better or worse, some of the ideas are good, some of them are terrible, but yeah, like you said, it's opportunity for people that want to build and help build that kind of stuff and have expertise.
To be clear, I don't think that you need like this guy in a startup who is the guy doing sales. Like, I think that technical founders, whether they're doing hardware or software, don't give themselves enough credit. Like, it's pretty natural it's a little awkward sometimes, but it's pretty natural to go out and talk to customers about something that you care enough about to start a company around. Like, you too can go and sell to customers, no matter how technical and siloed you were in whatever past big company job. There's no magic around it. You'll learn more, and it's hard to do really well. But like, that's part of, I think, your job as an early stage entrepreneur, to kind of be willing to do all of that. It'll make you a better engineer if you should be building.
Right. No, I think, we've talked about it on the show a bunch as well. When you're at a gathering with a lot of engineers there, or just people building projects, there is nothing that will get someone out of their shell more than talking about their project. So that could be a strong focal point of, now it's just you're showing your project to people that might actually want to buy it. So that's good.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I did want to ask about, so I mentioned that you guys are in the South Bay, but, what about like resources and stuff like that? I mean, do you guys have labs down there, or do you have partners, or how does that work? If someone applies and shows up to YC with, just an idea or an early prototype, how are they actually building that stuff out?
Yeah. So I thought that would be like a much bigger thing that I had to spend time figuring out, like how to get access to all kind of elaborate equipment, blah, blah, blah. What ended up happening is I ended up having about a $10,000 budget to build, call it a mini lab. So it's literally a couple 3D printers, one resin-based, one FDM. We'll probably add another FDM as soon as a good cheap laser cutter comes out. I'll get that. But it's basically like a couple reflow stations, some Arduinos, some sensors. It's a subset of what I had as like a hobbyist and doing a couple hardware startups. Nothing elaborate. And I think that's about the right amount. You can, if you have some like crazy custom thing that you need done, the danger is that you spend a bunch of time focusing on that crazy custom thing instead of asking yourself, like, you should basically do one of it. And then if it's such an important part of your business that you need to have it, it should be something that you're able to charge for and justify having someone else do.
Right. Hire a machinist or hire a layout engineer if you really have something crazy for like DDR3, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's like you are going to not be making this yourself unless it's like some custom. I mean, I hope to see some companies, like I was just reading about the guy that started one of the scientists behind A123 Systems is doing a new lithium ion startup.
Oh, cool.
And he's changing how they deposit I guess it's lithium slurry. Apparently everybody except for his new thing, innovation that some startups are doing where like that's the actual innovation. So like obviously they're an exception, but in general, if you're doing something crazy custom, you're probably like, we are experts in our fields where we start companies. So we get way into the weeds and have to pull ourselves out of like doing everything ourselves, being too cheap about it, and doing it in-house, right? Because like, unless it's a core part of your business, there's probably no reason why you should be spending space, expensive employees, and time in the Bay Area to be making more than a couple of something that you're machining, for example, right? Like,
Yeah.
It's not very expensive to send things, 2-day air from Shenzhen, and it's very inexpensive to have very skilled shops there make 10 or 100 or 1,000 of your widget.
Right. Yeah.
So actual devoted labs, we have, see something weird, like they need a water jet, cut something, I'll send them to tech shop. There's a couple really good networked 3D printer things. Bunch of my startups have recommended Fictive. There's a couple higher resolution overnight companies that like, and again, I have to check myself on this when I order parts from them for my own stuff. Like, you should not care about it costing $60 versus $80 to have an overnight 3D printed, good resolution
like
SLA or SLS part. Right.
Right.
And like that difference, it's really easy to obsess over that because we're cheap.
Right.
That's a waste of your time to worry about.
Yeah, that I totally agree about that, and I think that these kind of things too. It's like the fact that if you're finding something that's like $60 or $80 for an overnight print too, like that seems cheap to me. I mean, personally. So,
and then like there's one thing that I really want that I haven't found a good answer for: library of materials and the tactile stuff. Like, I want a button library because you read reviews on Wired or wherever about new products, and they talk about how buttons feel, like the click. And people care about that. But I have no good way, short of like telling my startups to go like 50 different variants from DigiKey or wherever.
Yeah.
There's no good way to really tell that stuff without actually seeing it.
I don't know if you'll ever fix that one though. I mean, like honestly, one of the best days for me was like when the connector vendor would roll in with suitcases, or when the button vendor would roll in with suitcases. So maybe
right. I think that's part of it, like just getting them to send me a copy of their suitcases.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's important, and I think it's just there have been a couple attempts, like this one hackerspace I saw in Seattle had a materials library. It's since shut down. It wasn't Metrics, it was one of the other big ones there. And some universities have them. There's like high-end academic new material subscriptions you can get, like where they send you like aerogel the month it came out.
Wow.
But in terms of commodity stuff, like it's really, I guess you just have to go there or just get them to send you a full library.
See, I think that's kind of the magic. We've seen a lot of videos on YouTube, and people in a lot of our audience has been to Shenzhen before. But like that is the magic of the markets. Any place where you have the hands-on, just being able to pick stuff up and be like, click, 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 click. Oh yeah, no, that's it, or it isn't it, or this is the right size, or it has the right opaqueness that I'm looking for. Like I don't know, man. I think that in terms of like I agree with the library, but I don't know about the online stuff. I don't know if that's really possible.
Yeah, I think it's just got to be in person. That's another interesting thing. Like Shenzhen's not far or expensive to get to. You're seeing a lot more. Like I just got, I'm a member of Ace Monster Toys in Oakland, and I forget who it was, but somebody was heading there, and they're like, "Hey, anybody need anything from?" I'm totally butchering the pronunciation, but Huaqiang Bay,
Huachong Bay,
big electronics market.
Huachong Bay, yeah.
Huachong Bay,
yeah.
And now it's at the point where people are going back and forth regularly enough, where if we communicated a little better, we could be like, "Here are 5 parts on Taobao that I used Google Translate to identify, and while you're there, please get these for me." And it's entirely feasible that like 20, 50 of us could get together and be like, hey, here's this guy who buys parts off Taobao for us and then ships it to us. And like, that's not a very elaborate thing to set up for small samples.
Hey guys, I'm here today and I have a new startup where I am disrupting extra space in your suitcase. We are like the Airbnb for suitcases going to Shenzhen.
Yeah, I haven't checked on it lately, but a year ago we funded a company basically, I think it was called Backpack, that was essentially selling spare capacity, because things like GoPros are super expensive, or like iPods are substantially more expensive in India and other developing countries than here. So it was, I don't know what they're doing lately, but I like the idea.
I think on a long enough timeline, those kind of things always end up with moving drugs.
Yeah, that's an easy one to make fun of.
Right. Wow, that's pretty funny though. Yeah. I mean, it's tough, right? I mean, having that hands-on is, like you said, it's so important and I think that kind of points to the fact that you guys are really focused on that, right? You are doing user-centric stuff, right? So testing and understanding what users will actually want in a product, and that is a big piece that I've noticed as well. Coming from the hardware world, going to the software world, even just like talking to designers, I didn't even realize designers were a thing, like web design versus coding or program developers type thing. I didn't even realize that was a thing where people are actually crafting those experiences. I guess the similar thing for hardware would be like industrial designers, stuff like that, but I could never afford those. But I didn't even realize that was a thing. And when you get to that echelon of like, especially like consumer, where that's like a point of differentiation, that like just the importance of those small details, and having someone there to kind of tap you on the shoulder and be like, the small details matter. They actually help you make sales. That was very foreign to me. So it's good. It's good you guys are doing that.
Yes, that's important. And then I think the most powerful thing that we do is get our entrepreneurs to get us and all, any industrial designers that they have on their cover. The smartest entrepreneurs get us and all those consultants out of the way and ask users, because like at the end of the day, those are your customers, and it's like blindingly obvious when you say it, but difficult, and you need to keep checking yourself on it as you start a company to actually to just focus on what they actually want, because that matters way more than what I or anybody else giving you advice could possibly tell you.
Right. Yeah, no, that I'm learning that one the hard way too. So that it brings up a question about hardware though too. So does that mean that all of the hardware is consumer level hardware? Are there any like industrial or medical or anything like that?
Yeah, I don't know as much about the medical stuff. We have like some medical, an increasing number of biotech, and then B2B is really interesting. Like T-Bot, for example, their customer that they're selling to is a retail outlet. My friend Brian had an interesting company called Transcend Lighting that's doing a really good indoor LED-based grow light, and he's selling to the emergency. I want to see more B2B. I think there's just a lot of opportunity there, and it takes some more thought. Like, it's easy for us to be like, why doesn't this thing exist for me as a consumer to use every day, right? Those are kind of like easier opportunities to see than like, why is this truck, this freight moving network like 20% less efficient than it should be, and how can I solve that? Right. You know what I mean? Like those are, I think, unless harder opportunities to see.
Yeah, they're unless you're in that or coming from that environment, you're not going to understand all of the things. You have to go out and actually kind of find those opportunities before you start building something, versus being like, well, I want an internet connected fishbowl, and there might be other people that want that. And
right.
Yeah. So that kind of
What's cool though is that like, and we have a strong body of this with some of our more successful software startups, where they're selling to small businesses, selling to other companies, and like they expect to pay people who are running their own businesses, and larger companies too, but I think small businesses can be easier initial customers because they can just like, it's a guy to talk to sometimes to get stuff done. They are used to paying real money for things that make them more money or otherwise make their lives easier. So it's cool. It's not that different. I think like with T-Bot, for example, I think we'll see more companies that do hardware initially to businesses and then learn from that and get some exposure to then launch like consumer versions. I think that could be a really interesting thing that isn't that explored, especially things that are like, make sense for they're things like a tea dispensing robot, for example, that are way more expensive to build at quantity 10 or quantity 100 than they will be to make at like quantity 10,000.
Right. Yeah, it's not going straight to building a Keurig, which is, has to be bottom of the barrel costs, but you start to understand more about what people actually want in a tea, so that when you do go to a consumer level, then that actually does make sense, right? You can actually understand that, oh, no, there should be temperature variation versus, just having something heat up like a standard coffee maker does.
Yeah, totally. So, I think that's like, I don't know. And that's something that they'll literally know from people making that. They probably already know from thousands of cups, and they'll know from tens or hundreds of thousands of cups in the next couple months. People actually adjust the temperature. Like, do they care about what temperature exactly tea is being dispensed at? And I mean,
so it's like big data for cups of teas, huh? It's like
there you go.
They see the distribution of temperatures and stuff. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, I should let you go, because I mean, I know it's getting pretty damn late there. How do people go about signing up or applying rather? What's the? I mean, you mentioned this about a couple hour process, but where do they actually go to do that?
Super simple. It's apply.ycombinator.com. We have no religion about categories of companies, number of hardware compared to number of software. I am biased, obviously. I want us to be 99% or no, only 80 hardware, 19% biotech, and 1% software, but I'm obviously biased.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
You are like, I'm worried that people get intimidated out of applying because like we have a prestigious brand. You should apply. Like, it doesn't hurt to apply. And in fact, applying, getting rejected, showing progress, and applying again is one of my favorite things to see. We really like to read applications where someone got rejected and then showed a bunch of progress. Like, that's someone who's kind of a moving train, right? They're going to get their thing done. And then it's just a question of like whether we want to be on board or not, but it's, they're kind of executing regardless. So long answer short, apply.ycombinator.com. I want to see a lot more hardware applicants.
I think I would be more scared of getting it because of what it would mean. You know what I mean? Like, I could throw an idea on there, but but like, honestly, like, if you get it, if you get accepted, it's like, oh shit, I got to build this thing in 3 months. Like, oh boy. Yeah. So no, that's.
Yeah. I mean, like, you should apply for something you care about. Like, it should be something that you are willing to make substantial sacrifice in your life to make exist. Or if you already have a prototype, even better. I mean, good, but like certainly not a requirement. If I applied without a working prototype, I would probably, before interviews, if I got an interview, I would have together a half-working prototype and start showing it to people personally. Yeah. If it was something that you could do that for, and it probably is if it's consumer facing. But yeah, I mean...
Or at the very least, as we've talked about on the show before, make sure you bring your other hardware so that you show that you have the pedigree to make other things, right? At the very least. That's what I would say.
Yeah, like, you don't want to just be a guy with an idea. Anything you can do to differentiate yourself from that norm is positive.
Yeah. And it'll probably get you accepted in the first place.
Right.
All right. Well, Luke, how can people find you? Are you a Twitterer? Yes?
A bit. Iseman, Liseman. My website, which I don't update enough, is lukeiseman.com. And feel free to reach out with questions. If people do apply, shoot me a note, luke@ycombinator.com. I'm happy to look at your application and I'll give you honest feedback. And regardless of whether you do it with YC or something else, I want to see more smart hardware people starting interesting things.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I think this kind of helps shed some light on where you guys are going and where you guys have been and where you've been too. I think it's been really interesting. So thanks for being on the show and sharing your story.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye.